Good evening and welcome everybody. I am so excited. I have known Jay Calderin. I've had the honor of knowing Jay Calderin for many, many years. I've had the opportunity to hear him speak on numerous occasions. And every time I am just like so excited tonight. um, it's and the topic I think is one of those topics that it's sort of like we just don't pay attention, but it surrounds us. This topic surrounds us, and we really don't think about it. But it surrounds us. Fashion is everywhere, and it's about everything. And we were before you all came on. It's really how do you narrow down the conversation, and that's Jay's job tonight. But I think it's an important conversation, especially as we're coming into it. The world is becoming more and more and more multicultural. What does that mean, and how does it look showing up? One of the things that I noticed, even among just kind of the more mainstream examples, is I watch late night shows, and you have Stephen Colbert and you have Jimmy Kimmel. I always get the two of them mixed up. Jimmy Fallon, and then you have Seth Meyers. Seth Meyers started wearing plaid shirts to be on air, and some of his guests have actually commented about you're still wearing your plaid shirts, and we're past the pandemic. I'm here in person, and one of his guests the other day brought a shirt and tie for him to put on. I mean, I thought of this, Jay. I thought of you. I thought, oh, here we go, and that's mainstream. It's like, oh my God. He's supposed to wear a shirt and tie. That's the uniform. And he broke the rules. He broke the rules. And so it's like, I'm thinking that's mainstream. It comes up so often for many, many of us in many of our different settings, but I'll stop because they're not here to listen to me. We're here to listen to you. Before we do, Lisette, would you do me a favor? I want to thank our generous sponsors that support Conexion. So our partners are Hollister Group, which Kip Hollister, and Mass Business Roundtable, JD Chesloff, which have been very great sponsors for us the last few years. And so I want to thank them for their support and collaboration. And I also want to thank our sponsors, Luma Sales, who's starting with Conexion this year, and Unicare and TJX. So I want to thank all of them for their generous support of Conexion, because we couldn't do it without you. And so now the next slide, Lisette. I'm just going to, you can look Jay up, but he's going to talk about himself, and he's going to talk about what he does. But just one little note, one of the many places that he's been is he's a co-director of education and director of community relations at the School of Fashion Design here in Boston. He is the founder of Boston Fashion Week, which started, I can't believe this, 28 years ago. You must have been just a kid when you started, adolescent or something. Yeah, 14 years old, something like that. I started Boston Fashion Week, which has been a huge part of the Boston fashion scene. Mass College of Art, and on and on. He's written many books. Some of you, I understand that one of the people here tonight, Jay, has one of your books, and so she was very excited about it. It might be a he, for all I know, that she has your book, and she's going to get to hear you this evening. So without further ado, I want to turn the mic over to you, Jay, and I'll ask you one question. The format tonight is Jay's going to basically share with you some of his thinking around this topic, and it's kind of freewheeling, but please, 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 please write your questions in the chat. We'll get to those later because we do want to share. Jay's really looking forward to your questions, but just to kick us off, we wanted you to say a little bit about how has your heritage, I know you're Latino, you grew up in New York City, how has it influenced you as a professional? Let's start there.
Okay. Well, first, thank you for having me. This, for me, is just a really fun way to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. It was a challenge for me, putting my thoughts together into, a presentation. So thank you for that opportunity, because, again, I think it's one of the most fun ways for me to celebrate. But my heritage, I always like to, when it comes to my heritage and what I do, I always like to go back to the beginning and tell the story of when I was 14 years old, and being a student at a fashion school at the age of 14. It was the 80s. And one of the things I was most terrified of was being pegged, right? Put in a box and labeled. And one of the things as a teenager, not terribly evolved yet, was that I was scared of working with red or working with anything sort of frilly and very feminine, because I didn't want to be the cha-cha designer. I didn't want to be the Puerto Rican designer in New York who just does Spanish, right? And when you're young, it's scary because you want to fit in, and you're not quite evolved enough, to start to embrace your culture and your heritage. So it was about fitting in, right? And thankfully, I evolved. And even by the time I had left school, I was already getting very excited about how my culture fed my creativity. So when I started to embrace that is where everything changed, where I really felt like I don't have to be, accept any labels. I can create my own, and I can really start to define what being a Latino at the time, Latinx designer meant. Going into the industry, I didn't have to, worry about stereotypes and or again these labels. So for me, my Latinness or my heritage has been a source of creativity for me. I just recently did one of those DNA tests, and I found out I'm part Spanish, part Portuguese, and I think it's like 14% indigenous from Puerto Rico, indigenous Indian from Puerto Rico. So that just has inspired me to no end. Like I have dived into my culture and had so much fun exploring it. But again, not just, I'm all about, again, the museum side, the scholarship of it, but I also want to think about how do I move forward with that heritage? How do I evolve? And, how do I make that the kind of this edition, like in fashion, there's always a new season. How am I that person who's moving in the industry with my culture?
Wow. And that's just the opening. Okay. All right. Now we're going to take a deeper dive, and let me get my my magnifying glass so I can read here. My second question is, what keeps you working in the fashion industry? And there's a lot to be said there. So I'll let you take it over from there. So say more about what it is now, today, and for you.
Well, I think for me, it keeps me going. To be honest with you, it's like, I think it also goes back to the beginning, because when I first, when I was applying to high schools, because in New York, there were these specialized high schools, and I applied to all of them. And I wanted to, do graphic design. I wanted to go to theater arts, all these different kinds of high schools. And I was very fortunate. I got into the ones I wanted to go to. But one of them offered me this work study program where I could actually make a little money. And we were very poor, so we didn't have money for art supplies. And for me, anything that would allow me to have art supplies was like, okay, I'm there. Yeah, I'll do whatever it takes, to have money for my art supplies. And that was the High School of Fashion Industries. So at the high school level, I went in there, and what was funny about it was that it brought everything together. My interest in the theater and performance is on the runway. My interest in graphic design, brought me to textile design. And then my interest in all aspects of the arts could be channeled through fashion. So I was there expecting to transfer. I was like, okay, well, I'll do it for a little while. And if I don't like it, I can go to one of the other schools. And I fell in love, and it's still going strong. And the whole idea behind being able to tap into all my interests, because fashion isn't just about apparel. It really is about a lifestyle, about, because you can incorporate fashion into almost every industry in one way or another. So yeah, I think that has kept me going, but also getting older and hopefully a little bit wiser, I know what a culprit the fashion industry can be when it comes to affecting the wellness of the planet, but also of people. When it comes to self-image, when it comes to fair trade and getting a fair wage, so many different things that are bad about the industry that I love. So I think one of the things that drives me too is that we can do better. And I want to help in any way I can with that. So one of my outlets for that, which I'm really proud of, because I'm not necessarily, I mean, I've gone on plenty of marches, but I'm not that kind of activist. My activism really comes through training the next generation of students. So, excuse me, I get to work with this next generation. And it doesn't go just one way. They don't, it's not like I just, okay, I'm going to teach them my ways and all that kind of stuff. Listening to them, I learn and evolve as I go. So I get as much from them as I hopefully give them. But the idea, that's one of those things that keeps me going, because I never get to rest on my laurels. Every semester there's a new group, and their goal seems to be, at least for the past like 10, 15 years, I've been teaching for like 25, to challenge, to sort of say, oh yeah, I want to learn, but what about this? What about sustainability? What about fair trade? All these different kinds of things. So that keeps me going, and it keeps me feeling young. I'm always surprised. I always think there's not a huge age difference between my students, because when I started, there wasn't. Now I realize that some of my students, I could be their grandfather. So it's a little bit of a culture shock, but I still feel really engaged with them. And again, they keep me going.
What are some of the three big things for them? I mean, that you see now that you didn't see when you started? I mean, what are some of the three big ideas?
Well,
yeah.
Diversity. I mean, that's huge. Representation, on the runway in advertising, but also within the industry itself. We pay a lot of lip service to designers who may be Latino or Black or Asian, but the truth of the matter is there's still not a lot of people at the top in those positions, in the higher positions. So they keep me honest, they challenge me. It's like, oh, what about this? Every time I think we're doing pretty good on something, they're definitely ready. It was like, what about this? So again, that's huge. Fair trade, people care about who makes their clothes. This next generation is challenging about that. Like, should we do it locally? Should we do it? Should we do something overseas? If we do something overseas, are they getting a fair wage? Are they getting to be creative as well and contribute to the process? So lots of different subjects. And of course, sustainability, how we make clothes is a huge thing as well, because again, that definitely affects negatively on the health of the planet. So those are just a couple of them. And then of course, now more recently, gender. Thinking about, I never even thought about, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought about the gendering of clothes, because clothes have no gender. We assign clothes gender. So, and it changes over time. I was just talking to students today about pink and blue. Pink was associated with boys because it was a vibrant, energetic color, right? Associated with red and blood and fighting. And blue was considered passive, beautiful and calm like water. So that was associated with little girls. And then there was a switch, right? So all of a sudden now, well, not now so much, but over the more recent history, blue for boys, pink for girls. So, and now that's being, excuse me, being challenged all the time. And that's exciting, because now we used to break down fashion categories into menswear and women's wear. And now it's all about apparel, gender neutral clothing, because there's so much of it already that we take for granted. But really being able to bridge the gap between, all those different labels.
So, Lisette, do you have a question you want to pose to Jay?
Yes. Well, my interest was more in Boston, like not just Boston Fashion Week, but Fashion Week in general. It's kind of like the chicken or the egg that we talked about, where to what extent does one person influence Fashion Week, and then that influences the trends and styles for the next season.
Here in Boston, you mean?
Oh, I guess like in the general.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In
like the ones
general?
that happen in like Copenhagen, like the bigger ones that gain a lot of
Oh,
attention.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's become very like this little, it's an unusual cycle. It's almost like what they say about happy endings. It depends on where you stop in the story. So it depends on where you stop in the cycle in terms of who's influencing who, because I would say up until about the 60s, fashion was top down. The elite designer set decided what the trends were going to be and dictated fashion. So after that, if you weren't buying those clothes, you weren't in fashion, right? So that was the thinking behind it. But after that, it became much more democratic. Well, not much more, but it became more democratic. And I think part of that, now I have my fashion history teacher hat on. Part of that is in the 70s when global travel became easier, more people were flying places because of air travel. All of a sudden culture could be transported more easily. So all of a sudden you see global influences from all around the world in fashion. People are getting very excited. So then it was culture influencing fashion, but then more and more, excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. Apologies for coughing. Then we have a little bit later on when we start to see the beginnings in the 80s and 90s of street culture, then all of a sudden it's about how people are interpreting the fashion. Like I remember, like Tommy Hilfiger being a brand that was very generic. It was more generic than Ralph Lauren, Brooks Brothers, it was that kind of all Americana. But then all of a sudden kids were buying it in the sale bin, but buying it in XXL and wearing it to perform and, just having a whole other attitude about it. And he was smart because he tapped into that. He said, oh, that's what they want. So let's do it in the right sizes, the right colors, that kind of stuff, so that it speaks to that customer. So then, that's an obvious case of real people and who have style, who want to interpret the clothes, influencing designers. So now you see designers paying attention to how people are wearing their clothes. That kind of, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes,
So,
thank you.
so there's another question in the chat. I was going to let Carlos read it. You want to read it, Carlos, please? Because I don't have my glasses. I apologize.
No worries. It says, Jay, do you think Latinos, Hispanics add value to the fashion scene in the US and worldwide? And I think, what's the value that we add if you think we add value? Why do you think?
We add value to everything. It isn't just about fashion. I used to joke with my mom, because when we hear statistics about the Latino communities or Latinx and Hispanic communities growing in the United States, I always just joke, we're taking over. And I think the whole idea behind it is about not so much if we influence, but how we influence, because sometimes it's in real subtle ways. It's about culture, it's about how we do business or how we interact. And sometimes it's aesthetic. Sometimes it's like we're bringing things to people's attention. So there's definitely value across the board. And again, not just in fashion, but I think there's, it's about the challenge to look for it, the challenge to make the connections. Like, one of the, I'm going to reference it in my slides in a minute, but one of the biggest names out there, more in streetwear now, surprisingly, but is Balenciaga. And I remember not kind of making the connection in my head when I was younger, that was a Spanish designer. That was a designer who is who was at the top of his game, influencing other designers. And that's back in the 50s, right? The 50s and the 60s. So we want to remember that we need to take responsibility and arm ourselves with information, with facts, with references, so that we can talk the talk. Because a lot of times it comes from, we don't see the value because all of a sudden we think, oh, well, I don't know any names, or I don't know anybody who does this. And the truth of the matter is, that it's just out there all through fashion history, and then definitely out there in the community today. I hope that answered their question.
Yeah, I think so.
We have another 2 questions.
Okay.
And then we'll let you take it from there, okay?
Okay.
Because I want to give you time.
This is fun.
Okay, all right.
Balenciaga from, you already replied to that one, Spain, but someone asked, where is Balenciaga from? And then the Kardashians have embraced him.
Oh. I don't want to say anything bad about the Kardashians, but that's a different part of fashion and aesthetics. I gotta admit, I'm the old guy in the room when it comes to the value of the what's made in fashion. The Kardashians, very smart, great marketing. They know their stuff. They're making lots of money. More power to them. It's awesome. But one of the things I try to do when I'm talking to anyone about fashion is to make sure and break down what fashion is, and then all the different things around it. The things that feed the machine and the things that keep on going. The one thing you have to say about, even though it was a horror show that, for instance, Kim Kardashian wore the Marilyn Monroe dress, the JF Kennedy Marilyn Monroe dress. I don't know if anyone read about that, but that was this huge thing, especially for historians and curators of museums, because in my opinion anyway, that should have never been done. But the truth of the matter is, that whole incident, although it was technically a negative incident, brought attention to the importance of those artifacts, of clothing being incredibly important historically, and its need to be preserved. So unfortunately, we had to, partially, damage a dress to do that. But they are really good at connecting and spreading the word and getting people's names on people's lips. And but we're gonna one of the references I'm gonna have in my presentation speaks to that a little bit, so I won't go into it too much. But yeah, I mean, it's not so much that she's embracing Balenciaga. It's more the other way around, because Balenciaga, again, was this incredible couture house, and we need to see which one is the more valuable. She's definitely the more visible one right now, but doesn't mean that when it comes to art and aesthetics, that because she's embracing it, all of a sudden it's cool. It's been cool and very special for a very long time. So that's diplomatic enough?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. That is great. That's food for thought. So
Yes.
while we're chewing on that food for thought, why don't we give you time to get into your presentation? So, and then we'll come back to more questions. So
that sounds good. That
Okay.
sounds good.
All right.
All right. So let me share my screen.
And keep those chats coming, people. Okay.
All right. Let me open this up so I can see you guys. All right. All right. Let's switch places here. Okay, can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Yep, okay. All right, so I use slides in a special way for me. They're not necessarily lots of information on a page, even though I do have some information in some of these. They're more for a prompt for me, and hopefully a trigger for you to remember something. I tried to find, images that will get your attention. But I came up with the title for this, The Fashion Lens, is because I want to encourage you to think about looking at whatever you're doing through a fashion lens. Now, even if you're not in the fashion industry, and especially actually if you're not in the fashion industry, try to think about the things we're going to go over in terms of how they might pertain to you, how you might apply the tools that we use in the fashion industry to think about how you present yourself, how you present your work, strategies for connecting with people, just like all the things we're going to talk about. Remember that today, banks pay attention to this kind of stuff because they need to communicate with people. They need to package themselves in a way to connect with communities, all that kind of stuff. And fashion is at the heart of that. Fashion has been doing that for a long, long time and has gotten really good at it. So keep that in mind as we're going through, because I don't want to, I tried really hard not to make this a fashion lesson, but make it basically a fashion kind of exploration, kind of hitting different areas that I think could be useful to people both in and outside of fashion. And when it comes to our identities, I also tried to include some bragging points that you can take a note on about very important names in the industry and other sort of references to our culture that we can weave into whatever that identity is that we're creating for ourselves as a professional. All right, so all of the things I'm going to talk about stem from my last book. And it's funny because this title has had some controversy, what they didn't teach you in fashion school, because I actually teach a class based on this book at a fashion school, at the School of Fashion Design. But it is actually really appropriate, because although schools might teach some of these different subjects, the book was really designed to remind that person or that person using it that they need to check in. You're not done with school and that's it, and then you move on. You need to keep sort of tapping into that well for information. So the book is a little bit of a survival book, survival guide for people who are going into the industry. And as I mentioned, I teach this particular a course based on it at the School of Fashion Design. And it's funny because a lot of people think that the course came second, but the book actually came from the course, because when I started to teach the course, I would have needed 9 textbooks to teach the course. So I had this great opportunity. I was invited to write a book for a publisher, and I got to do the perfect book for everything I wanted to share with my students. And I will say that one of the great things about the course is it constantly changes. So the book is technically, although the physical book is not growing, there's always new things being added to the course because it needs to keep current. So the book is a great foundation, and then we move from there. So the course brought all this on. I just want to give credit to the course, because the course came out of students learning all their fashion skills, maybe even going to other schools and learning business skills, but then not knowing what to do with all that. Like how to position themselves, how to package themselves, how to strategize for their own careers. So that's what it all came out of. All right, this first section is all going to be about insights, and in particular from in here. So my brain, so a little unusual sometimes, but hopefully it'll make some sense. So the first thing is to remember that fashion is more than apparel or clothing. We always think that any kind of garment is fashion. It really isn't. Just because we put a label in it doesn't make it fashion. Fashion is about storytelling and basically creating fantasies, aspirational ideas, So the clothing is the baseline, but the art form of fashion is a whole other level. So again, and not to shoot down graphic tees, let's say, because I collect graphic tees, so I love graphic tees, but that is not fashion. That is a graphic designer and a basic t-shirt and expressing yourself, and that is awesome. And it definitely can be part of fashion, but really fashion is that vehicle that's driving us forward and giving us a reason to buy clothes. Because truth of the matter is that most of us don't ever have to buy another garment ever and live the rest of our lives with what's in our closet. Not most people I speak to, that could be very true. So why do we go back to fashion? All right, first thing, the illusion of power. So this is a little myth busting, right? So we want to kind of break that up, because the power of fashion can be a little overwhelming and make you feel like you have to do things a certain way, follow certain trends. Like probably one of the questions I have the most trouble with when people ask me is like, oh, what's going to be the trend for this fall? And I'm like, there are no trends. There's only marketing. Trends come in communities. So a certain group will want this particular thing. Like if you're a fan of a celebrity or a particular designer, you're going to want to know what's next. But that's not across the board. So that's the first thing. So I have some disclaimers for you to kind of arm yourself with. Remember that all of these things are artificial. So we have hype. Celebrity and influence let you kind of buy into all the hype. Supreme, for instance, is one of the biggest of this. They don't make anything. They stick their colors and labels on things. They do collaborations with people, but it's this huge money-making machine, right? So that's hype. Media, there are so many false narratives that we just take for granted. And then scale, everybody wants to be big, but big is just big. It's not better. So you want to ask yourself, is big for you? Like, would you enjoy playing in that playground on a big scale? Okay. So just to go through a couple of these, we're mentioning Balenciaga. He's one of my heroes, Cristobal Balenciaga, and he was an artist, a sculptor. Christian Dior called him the master of us all. And that's how much respect other fashion designers had for Cristobal Balenciaga. This is him on the right. But this is not fashion. This actually makes me feel like he would be doing cartwheels in his grave. It is a chancla. It is a slipper. We stick the label on it, and I totally get it. It makes it cool because it's associated with the brand. But we want to make we want to have that discretion. We want to remember what all the work that people actually put into fashion. Now, not to trash this in any way, because it's valuable. It makes you feel a certain way, and that is awesome. But I'm a big fan of knowing the difference, so then you can choose, but not blindly assuming that you buying something with the Balenciaga word on it, the name on it, makes it fashion. Okay. Another, this one's a false narrative. Heidi Klum on reality TV show, and that's another kind of thing I like to bring people's attention to. Reality TV show is not real. It's entertainment. So always take it with a grain of salt. I love those reality TV shows because they inspire people. So I remember when they first started running Project Runway, enrollment at fashion schools bumped up. So I am grateful to them. But statements like this that are catchphrases for shows, you're either in or you're out, is not true. It's a lie. And this is very important because you can be either in or out of a particular group. You're never either in or out of the whole fashion industry or life in general. So again, words like this can have a lot of power. You could feel like, oh, if I didn't make it on that show, or if I didn't even make it on the show, I'm a loser, right? I wasn't good enough. No, probably you weren't dramatic enough because they want drama on the show. So keep that in mind, okay? And again, all these shows are so much fun. I totally get watching them. I have to give them credit too, because my father never understood what I do until he watched this show. Then all of a sudden he feels like he's an expert in what I do. So now he's bragging to all his friends. That's what he does. So, but before this show, he had no idea. He was always really supportive, but he had no idea what I did really. Another false narrative, best in show. There is no best. So only excellence. So if you do something in an excellent way, then that's amazing. Then you can be proud of that. But trying to be best is not really realistic because it's not a zero-sum game. So you always want to remember that you can be excellent at what you do, but this whole competitive aspect of best is a dangerous and slippery slope. Okay. All right. Oops, what happened? And then scale. This one is really important too, because again, it's about thinking about what is of value to you. We mentioned big, right? You know, of like being a part of a big company. If that makes you feel good, that is amazing. We want to go for that. It's aspirational. But I know, especially working with so many local and regional designers, that success for a local designer here in Boston might be, I get to go to work every day, do something I love, go home, feed the kids, have a white picket fence. You know, that's success to someone, right? So you want to ask yourself, what works for you? What would you get the most out of in a career? Again, we could be in fashion or anything else, but this whole idea that you want to be clear about what your definition of success is, because you don't want to be living someone else's dream and what their definition of success is. So really, this this prompts a lot of soul searching to see what's going to be important to you. All right, edge. So this is the second one. So now for edge, there's the power of illusion. And this is the flip side, right? So not the illusion of power, but the power of illusion. And this is about myth building. So here I want to bring your attention to one of my fashion heroes, Diana Vreeland. Now, one of the things that Diana Vreeland is known for a lot, I encourage you all to look her up. There's a great documentary called The Eye Has to Travel, and you can learn a lot about her. I think it's on Netflix now. But this book is really important. This was her autobiography. And when biographers after she had passed away, started to write biographies about her, they realized that this book, this autobiography, was rather embellished. Nothing that could be proven out and out not true, but it was she definitely was known for creating her life and for defining her life and putting it in a certain context. And this is another thing that happens in fashion now. Today we have a whole other version of that, you know, deep fakes and things like that, and alternative truths. But here, this wasn't a matter of deception. This was a matter of creativity. So while I don't recommend making stuff up on your resume or on your bio, I do recommend sharing how you look at the world, right? Because that is one of the things she did. And that's why she's so admired, is because she searched and crafted not just aesthetics, but sort of lifestyles for people. So, so keep that in mind, because again, especially in a world where we're worried about being transparent and you know, upfront and about everything, if you're in the creative field, you have some creative license sometimes to frame things in a certain way, to put them in a certain light, and to share them. Agency. So this is about putting, again, in fashion, putting you behind the driver's seat is a really tough thing to do, because it's not about one voice. A lot of people imagine that the fashion industry is about one designer dictating all. And the truth of the matter is that it is this community. It is a set of people. I remember a few years ago, Valentino well, one year they named everything after goddesses. And that was lovely and very beautiful. But then the next season, they named the gowns and the pieces in that collection using the names of the people who actually made those gowns in the workrooms. And that to me was so, so exciting. It gave them, and also not just named them, but did interviews with them online. You can find them online. Most of them are in Italian, but you can Google Valentino and well, I can't remember the year now, but all these celebration of their teams, because it is impossible for one person with a vision to kind of make them come to life, you know, at least on this kind of scale. Now, part of that is social contracts. So when we go out into the world, we have to navigate a world with other people and business situations. And one of the things about our community and our quote unquote Latinness is about feeling like you can initiate a renegotiation. Who is showing up to work? You probably heard about the Crown Act, about not being able to discriminate based on hair, you know, like dreads and braids and things like that. And if you haven't, it's a great campaign. I would look it up. Massachusetts actually passed it. And but it's this idea of saying you don't have to stand for the norm, but you also need to figure out, you know, how do you negotiate that in whatever environment you want to go into. A little example of that is some fashion history. So in the 80s, women going into the workforce, late 70s, early 80s, basically had to do a version of clothing that looked like menswear. So the first one you see here, again, navy suit, instead of a tie, a little bow, and that was dressing for success. And the power suit started to evolve, and all of a sudden we see another version of it here in the middle with a little color. And then we see the transition into allowing the suit to be feminine, to be in bright colors, you know, basically not being tailored to a man's version of what was fashionable and appropriate for business. And then we see, you know, I included the next couple of slides because of my mentioning about red earlier and my earlier version to it as a teenager. But again, this idea of even like not shying away from what some people might think is the stereotype, again, wearing red. So I hear the beautiful Sofia Vergara, the cover of Latina, all these different interpretations of the red dress. And then probably one of my favorites, Rita Moreno, again, this whole idea of like letting yourself enjoy that attention and reinterpreting it, you know, like not letting it be something negative. And fashion, again, an incredible tool for doing that. All right, so that kind of sets the stage. The first set of things I want to talk about here are you, us, and them. That is how the rest of the presentation is going to be broken down. So the first one is you, the individual. This is the first place. This is where you begin with whatever you're doing in fashion. You need to ask, do like assessments with yourself, finding out who's showing up. When you go into that meeting, who is that person showing up for that meeting? When you're working with a client, and then what version of you? Now, a lot of people will say, well, me is me. It's just not. That's not true, because all of us act differently when we show up in different environments. So if we're going to a funeral, we are going to have some respect for that situation and either wear a dark color or black, be well groomed, show respect for the ritual of that. So we want to remember that one way or another, we make adjustments. So ask yourself, who do you want showing up? Do you purposely want to stir the pot and make a statement, you know, walking in and get people's attention? Do you want to, you know, more, maybe more reflect the situation you're going into, right? And it's all a choice. There's no one way to do it. It's basically how you want to do it. So, but you need to do some work on you in terms of your professional, the professional persona, but also the creative persona. How do you want to creatively express who you are? Oop. Sec. I like to, I added a little bit of this because I also like to think, as I'm growing up, I always remember the lessons being brought up by my grandmothers, you know, things that grandmothers in particular will stick with grandmas, that they appreciate in a good Latin boy, right? You know, so these Latin qualities. And I remember just respect is key, right? For me, I remember in school, I was taught to never look a teacher in the eye. That was an act of defiance in my household. If I looked at my grandfather in the eye, I was trying to show off or trying to show my power. So when I went to school, all my teachers wanted me to look them in the eye because that showed I was being upfront. So it was a whole different thing. So I remember that when I was a kid, that I had to learn that it was different, right? It had different meanings in different cultures. And the other thing I remember is always asking for bendición, for a blessing when I left, you know, a home and there was an elder there. So I like to think about this in terms of applying it to any situation when it comes to being professional, having respect for the environment you're going into. And part of that in this case is focus, discipline, and fuel. So focus is about taking stock. Again, those self-assessments to figure out where am I at, what do I want to get out of the situation. So I always ask students, why fashion? So why are you interested in fashion? These are just 10 reasons to go into fashion. You want to be a maker. You want to explore or experiment with identity. You want to empower and communicate. You want to collaborate with peers. You want to make a difference. You want to entertain. You want to educate. You want to invent. You want to appreciate and be a connoisseur of fashion. Or you just want to have fun. It's exciting. It's fun to be associated with it all. And these are not just for fashion, right? These could apply to whatever endeavor you want to apply yourself to. But in fashion, these are just a few. These are just 10 of them. We can go further of the ways you can, basically separate lenses for fashion that you can look through. Stages. The person who's showing up is at a different stage. I was talking to Phyllis about, you know, the younger people who are just coming into professions that Conexion works with, and then, you know, the mentors. And so we need to remember that not only we are coming into a situation from a different stage in our career, but that we should be more aware of the stages people are at and what they're thinking. Like, where are they? We need to get in tune, especially if we're older. We need to get more in tune with where other people in the process are. First one, the students, let's say, use for an example, someone just starting out and learning. So this is the first big stage, and it's about survival. People are trying to do something that they love, so they're trying to learn as much as they can so that they can navigate that and survive the industry. Now, this brings about impetuousness, jumping on things, you know, maybe making some mistakes, and all of that is good. Like, mess up, make mistakes. But I would say to this younger, this initial stage, and it doesn't always have to be younger, it could just be someone starting a new career a little bit later. But I would say make those mistakes, but then also try as best you can. It's a little harder at this stage to put yourself in the shoes of the next two generations or next two stages. Establishing. So this is someone who's started their career and they're building a reputation. Now, this is an emotional stage. Everything is at stake. We are proving ourselves. So at this stage, you are hustling, you're trying to make money, you're trying to, again, build that reputation. And that's a huge, valuable thing. But then you have the nurturing stage, which is someone who's had their career to a certain place. I mean, not that they're retired or anything, but again, this had their career. But now it's about meaning. Now it's about maybe giving back, cultivating that next generation. but making sure we're not doing what the fashion industry did before the 60s, which is talking top down and just saying, this is the way. Making sure that we're listening as much as we're sharing. That's definitely been one of my takeaways as an educator. Now, role models. It's real easy to sort of just target your favorites. Like think about people who started off with power, with money, with a legacy, with education, with influence, with resources, with a network. Those are bad role models. They are aspirational, and they could definitely be kind of this shining light that you're walking towards, but they don't necessarily provide you the steps and the process to help you navigate your career, because they have advantages that you may not have access to. If you do not have money or access to money, then you cannot do what someone launching a brand can do if they already have money. So you have to get really clever. You have to bootstrap. You have to think about other ways of doing things. So I want you to consider that all of these are privileges that allow you to start at an elevated place. So don't feel bad if you don't have those. You just have to be clever and figure out how you can launch things. Okay, it's a great challenge. If you're a designer, that's a challenge to solve, right? So it just becomes one more thing you're going to design, which is your process. Avatars. Now, we all know about digital avatars, probably, even if we don't have one. We've heard about all the talk about the metaverse and having a representation online. Now, that's a whole other lecture, you know, how this is going to work. But I wanted to bring this up because we understand the concept of someone representing us when in that world, right? So I want to encourage you to think about who your professional avatars are. What version of you in that professional state, what does that mean? Like, for instance, I am a behind the scenes person, so I am not a fashion plate. And yet I work in the fashion industry, but I am a chore jacket or work shirt, jeans, sneakers. And when I'm upping my game, like if I really want to show, you know, if it's a very professional environment, I will throw a nice tailored jacket over that and maybe change into shoes if I know I don't have to wear them too long. So, but that's what I'll do. That's my definition. And it took a long time because I used to try so hard to be super fashionable when I was in my 20s. And it's just not me. I just don't care. And when it comes to me being fashionable means like a great watch, a cool ring, cool socks, a great scarf that jazzes up whatever I'm doing. That's my avatar going into a professional world. And then again, I have that next tier where I have a great tailored jacket that I invested in because it always looks good. Okay? Examples. These are two examples of a successful Latino fashion designers. On the left, we have Oscar de la Renta, and then we have on the right, Willy Chavarria. And they could not be more different, and yet they can be our role models or aspirational designers if that's the route we're going to take. There's no right or wrong. They both have value. They're both successful. Oscar de la Renta built a career, and I always say he built a career on ruffles. And in the 80s, he really tapped into that femininity of ruffles and beautiful colors. And even I put in a little picture here up on the upper right, his perfume was called Ruffles. Okay. And I love this little quote. I just threw that in because I just loved his quote. Every day you have to reinvent yourself. But again, that is his aesthetic. He kind of really went for it and built on it. Then we have Willy, who identifies as a queer Chicano designer, and he's redefining masculinity. He is playing with masculine tropes and really challenging people's perceptions of them, right? So worlds apart, yet both proud Latinx fashion designers that we can brag about. Discipline. first thing we want to be really informed about and really have control over and mastery over is bad habits. So I'm going to focus on one of them, and that is waiting. So I love this quote from Chuck Close: inspiration is for amateurs. So here on top, we see the muses, the 9 muses. And this is about not waiting, not being kind of a bit of a, like a diva, you know, when it comes to designing or doing something creative and saying, oh, no, I'm not inspired. You know, the muses haven't shown up. That is the surefire way to identify an amateur, someone who doesn't understand that fashion is also an industry. So I always like to remind students that if you have systems in place, and if you have like practices, things that can get you started, inspiration shows up while you're working. So because then you have something to reference. Either you like what you did, you don't like what you did, it made you think of something else. But if you don't start, you're nowhere. So something to think about in terms of that is a bad habit, to kind of like let yourself be too enamored of the idea of waiting for inspiration. And again, this is, I'm talking about fashion right now, but it could be for anything you want to do. New habits. This is a challenge. This is about challenging yourself to stick to new habits. And I do a little exercise with my students where I say, what's one thing you can commit to doing every day starting tomorrow? And it could be spending 5 minutes looking through my Instagram feed or looking for designers. What do you want to do every week? I'm going to take every Sunday morning with my coffee, and I'm going to read up on a new designer that I haven't heard of before. What am I going to do every month? I'm going to watch a documentary about a different fashion designer. Every year, I'm going to take a trip to New York and visit the latest fashion exhibition. Whatever it is, but just creating habits that will feed your creativity is a great thing to plan it out. And actually, I have this little calendar on there because you should work it into your schedule. Block out the time. I block out, I write everything on my calendar, because if I don't, I forget. I mean, could be age at this point, but the idea behind just blocking time and also making the time, where you're basically saying, you know, this is valuable enough for me that it belongs on a schedule. Okay, even if it's a 15-minute block, a 30-minute block, whatever it is. And that's a great way to start to build new habits. And in fashion, you need to feed the engine. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. So blocking off time, hugely important. Now, in what we're talking about today, we want to remember that one size does not fit all. And this is kind of another bad habit where we're looking for answers. We want someone to have done the work for us, and basically say to us, how did you do that? I want to do the same thing. It doesn't work that way. At best, you get a bad copy of whatever they did. So I want you to think about, instead of thinking about answers, thinking about asking really good questions. So, you know, instead of how did you do that? What happened along the way? Because then maybe you can identify things that can actually help you. But the key here is not to look for silver bullets. They don't really exist. You want to really think about how you can customize what you're going to do. And this one's controversial. Carlos liked this one. I wrote this one in my book, but also I use this in almost every lecture, is please, I beg of you, stop following your dreams, okay? And the key word I have issue with here is following. It's passive. So I would encourage you, instead of this, start preparing for your dreams, okay? Because then you're in them. Then you're in them. You don't have to wait for them. They're not going to show up. The minute you start, you're in the context of your dreams. You're just preparing for them, right? You're going to school, you're taking a class, you're watching a video, whatever it is, because you don't want to be led around by your dream. The dreams are wonderful because they're like a match going off, right? They're the catalyst for something. They get you going. They give you that push. But from then on, you need to have agency over the dream and be in the driver's seat, like we talked about earlier. This one's a big one for me. Is that red line on my screen? Oh, anyway, sorry, little things distract me. Latinx, enough. This one I have such a personal relationship with. I still feel I am not Latin enough. And sometimes I am too Latin. So what we need to think about is just saying enough to that. That is no longer a thing. No one can define that for you. If anyone tries to make you feel like you're not Latin enough for this or too Latin for this, that's a non-statement. That is a false narrative. So we need to embrace that. And this, by the way, is the sign language for enough, which is holding the fist and two here. And the idea, again, of this is so huge because it acts like our inner critic. And it always undermines us with whatever direction we're going in. And we want to take that power away from it. Because I definitely have suffered through this, because sometimes when I'm in communities that are primarily Latino or Latinx, I feel like, again, I'm not enough. And it's situations where I'm the only Latina, I feel like I'm too Latino for some people. Not a thing. Let it go. Okay. All right. And part of that being too much, and it is a thing that we all contend with, that's associated with being Latino sometimes, is volume, our passion, our voice. And all I'm going to say about this is make sure you know the situation and how do you want, again, think about that avatar, who is in the space, because I think the power of excitement and a passionate voice and volume can be an exciting thing. But again, just like everything, we have these social contracts with people when we go into spaces. Just keep in mind that we also can't be, well, I should say we can't be, we want to consider whether or not we want to be, again, that powerful voice, or, and does the situation call for it in terms of whatever we're trying to do. Fuel, this is about feeding that creative machine. Sourcing inspiration. So the machine is that creativity. So you need to be able to always be sourcing, and this is where the habits come in. So looking at fashion magazines, going to fashion exhibitions, fashion documentaries. Now, this is a huge new resource. I should say new, it's been a while since probably since the 80s. But now there are so many, there are libraries of fashion documentaries about like, you know, everything from Vogue to actual designers, to stylists, to editors. So, and most of them are pretty good. There are a few duds out there, but most of them really give you insights into creativity and process. But you don't want to forget about the more unpleasant documentaries, the one that are calling us on all the mistakes. So River Blue, for instance, the one in the middle there, really kind of hit a nerve, because I saw, I forget where it was in the world, but the rivers near these factories were gorgeous, but they weren't natural. It was these sort of incredible dyes floating around. And if you were looking at it from an artistic point of view, it was beautiful. But then you find out that the cancer rate in that town is through the roof because everybody's water is contaminated. So we need to also educate ourselves and, you know, take this information in. Then specific publications that speak to our culture, museums. This is El Museo del Barrio in New York City. And then the things that feed us in literal ways. Like for me, me making a Spanish meal is one of the few meals I can make. And I love doing that because it feeds me creatively as well. Books, obviously, sort of literature, and then music. Like I just had across the street Bad Bunny play at Fenway Park, and I had known about him, but I hadn't really listened too much to his music, and I fell in love. Like it was so amazing, so powerful. So again, you want to feed yourself through all your senses. And again, even if it's not directly related to fashion, I mean, I'll just give you an example, just going back a couple of slides. Here is Bad Bunny on the cover of Bazaar just recently, because of the way he expresses himself through clothing. All right. So now we did you or us, I mean, or me, right? Now us, the team. We need to ask ourselves, after we've come up with something we want to do, where we're going in the industry. So where do you want to live, work, and play? And this could mean literally living in a space, but it could mean an environment, like a particular type of company. Why is this neighborhood or community, why this community or why this neighborhood? And again, because it has things, you can check the boxes on the things that you want from a team. And I want you to stress the fact that the team is hugely important, in any endeavor, but in particular in fashion. You want to build a community and a support system. Back to one of my sort of Latinx qualities, another thing that grandmas appreciate, a good appetite, right? They don't want to hear, oh, I'm dieting, or I don't want a second helping. That is not cool. No, you really want another plate. I'll go get you something, even if you're saying no. So this is something that's appreciated, and it's appreciated, this appetite for creativity as well. People appreciate when you're hungry for doing creative things. So here we have connection, exposure, and strategy. Connection. You can't do it alone. And one of the words that I have real trouble with is the word networking. And only because so many people don't do it in a way that builds things. It's about collecting names or business cards. And for me, when I network, I would rather speak to one person that evening and really get to know them than to get 20 cards. And it's about building relationships and also building those communities. So remember that you want, when you are in that phase of connecting with other people, that is the goal. And then I just want to, again, when it comes to bringing people together and working as teams, this is the late Isabel Toledo and her husband, Ruben. And this is them working in their incredible studio in New York. These are some of her designs. She's like one of my favorite designers. Wow. And she did the inaugural suit for Michelle Obama. The next stage after connecting is about downtime. So we want to remember that we can't always be on full speed. So recharging is an important thing. We want to be able to make that time. And again, this is another thing you want to build into your schedule. I will admit, this is a hard thing for me to allow myself time to do. I am guilty of this. I will say this in public, and it's being recorded. So I acknowledge that, but it's important to bring it up, to say it out loud, to put it on your calendar. And in that downtime, another thing is when you're not the star of the show, when it's not about your project, ask yourself, what do other people in your community need? Be a helper. This one I got from Mr. Rogers. He's one of my heroes. Be that helper. Figure out if something else is going on in your community that's fashion related or related to your particular pursuit. Ask yourself, how can I be of help? How can I use whatever influence I have or whatever resources I have to help someone else realize their vision? That's another way to build community and also uplift the whole community. And then you have just the value of merging ideas and inventories. So I want to bring your attention to one of my favorite designers. I have the pleasure of knowing her. This is Carla Fernandez from Mexico. And she is known for working with indigenous communities, not just to kind of take their handiwork, but to actually build situations where they can produce things, get a fair wage, and be celebrated for their craftsmanship. She is one of my favorites, and she also has, makes really strong political statements through her work. So she collaborates with that side of the world. This is from an exhibition, a recent exhibition in Denver at the Denver Museum, which is phenomenal. And this is her with her husband. And her husband is a sculptor. And you notice here these headdresses on the mannequin on the right. She collaborates with him. And he also, this is their house, which is this incredible brutalist house in Mexico. But he also helps in terms of the interiors of her stores. I mean, again, other types of collaborations, sort of artist designer. This is an example of some of his work on the walls with some models in front. And then we have exposure, finding your tribes. So I'm going to show you 3 slides, and I want you to think, what do these things have in common? Okay, Mr. Rogers, these Star Wars toys, and pasteles. Okay, so some of you may have guessed, me. That's my tribe. Those are my tribes. Any of these things mean something to me, will get me like to go, they'll get me to leave the house, like if someone's making pasteles, they ask me to help, and they say they're going to give me a couple, that will get me out of the house. That will get me anywhere pretty much in Massachusetts. And the same thing with Mr. Rogers. Toys, I collect toys. And I always like to tell the story about my grandma, because she used to take me to Woolworths for lunch every Saturday. And I could get a small toy every Saturday, a little thing. And when she passed away, I wasn't able to be able to go down for the funeral. And I went on a Saturday. There wasn't a Woolworths, but I had lunch, and I treated myself to a little toy. And I've been doing it ever since. And now I have a pretty cool collection of toys. So again, we want to think about, like, where can we connect? What other worlds can we connect with through the things that we are a part of? Again, by choice, especially. Placement. Now, this is a word you hear a lot in marketing and fashion, finding the right home for a product. And I want to talk about that being very similar to immigrants, right? Finding a new place, finding your space. My first exposure to that was West Side Story, right? Territories, finding your territories. And thinking about this, I know there's always challenges, but again, trying to find the ways to make it a new frontier, a new place to explore. One of those areas right now, in a lot of cultures, is futurism. So ethnofuturism. This is an exciting place to explore. This art piece is actually associated with Afro-Latinx futurism, but there's Afro futurism, Chicana futurism. And this is an exciting place to explore from a creative standpoint, but also from a fashion standpoint. And again, not just for art, but for a way of thinking. And what I love about it is that it fuses your culture with a vision of the future, whether that be techie or or completely different. But it's a way of thinking about who we are and how we move forward in our world. Comic books, the VR world, we talked about the metaverse. So again, not just Latinos as a consumer for this, but as a creator for this world. And one of the reasons I bring this up too is that a lot of people don't realize that if you're studying fashion, that you can apply that to something beyond just clothing. You can design clothes for characters in video games or VR games. You can design wardrobes and costumes for characters in comic books. So you can dress up. I have my next one here. This is La Borinqueña. I don't know if any of you know this, but this is Edgardo Miranda Rodriguez created La Borinqueña, and they do a lot of fundraising for Puerto Rico. And now this is a part of that world where people get dressed up for things. And in fashion, if you have fashion skills, that could be, again, a whole other specialty for you as a designer. Strategy. I encourage everyone to think about your strategies for your career. Again, whether it's in fashion or out of fashion, is for it to be project-based. Think of whatever you're going to be doing, even if it's a new job, think of it in 3 acts. Budget a time. Say, how long do I want to be in this position or working on this project? Let it have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And again, you can have an extension. That job could be extended, and you can say, oh, I'm going to be there more than the 3 years I was planning to be in that, that level position. But give yourself these little targets because they also are comforting. They allow you to think about, is it time for me to go or switch directions? And it's a constant evaluation, because the other thing is, we no longer live in a world like with my grandparents, where you work at a job all your life, you retire and you get a gold watch. That is not a thing anymore. So we need to remember that jobs also are about building a reputation. So sometimes, especially when you're starting out, you have these targets, and they also help you from not quitting things too quickly, because you want to ask yourself, if you're in a job for 6 months and all of a sudden you're moving on to the next thing, yeah, that could be a good thing, but sometimes it could work against you if your resume looks like you're popping around too much. Okay. Menu-based. Thinking about having more than just one skill related to what you do is something that's definitely been explored in the fashion industry. And I want to show you an example with one designer, Isaac Mizrahi. Now, he is a fashion designer, and there's a documentary, by the way, that I highly recommend called Unzipped. This is a still from it. This was back in the 80s. This was actually probably the first really good fashion documentary. It's a lot of fun, and he's hysterical. This is him taking a bow. But in addition to doing really high-end fashion, he's done collections for Target. He does a cabaret act, and he actually sometimes comes up to Boston. I highly encourage you to consider checking him out. He's very funny. And then he's written books. He even has this comic book. It's out of print now, but this really incredible oversized comic book. So, and he's had TV shows. Oops, sorry, let me go back to that one. So all different ways of expressing his talents and building an audience as well. So having a portfolio career where you're thinking about, I'm going to write, articles, or I'm going to write a book, or I'm going to be a guest, an expert on a TV show, whatever it is, thinking about expanding that audience and your skill set. Storytelling. This is a fun example of the power of fashion when you're storytelling in fashion. So editorials are a great example of this. And whether you're the designer influencing an editorial, or you're an editor or a photographer or a stylist, those are all different ways into fashion. You can tell beautiful stories. So I picked this one because everybody knows this story. Alice in Wonderland. This was a Vogue editorial shot by Annie Leibovitz. So all the classic, imagery around Alice in Wonderland, but all featuring, and Alice in the traditional version of Alice in Wonderland wore blue. So you see all these beautiful gowns that a stylist put together that tap into the culture of that story, but feature designers in a whole different way. All right, so we're in the third last stage, which is them. So we had us, you, us, and them. Now, them is the audience, because we don't want to forget about our audience. I always tell my students that art is different than design, because art is a monologue, right? We're kind of saying this is what we're putting out in the world, but design is a dialogue. You're not going to be successful if you don't check in with your customer and your audience. So two of the questions we can ask here is, when is the right time? And then how do you want to deliver? Like, how you want to do that. Another thing that's celebrated in Latin culture is celebrating things, right? Just being able to have fun with things and honor things. Because I like to think about celebrating thing as honoring something. So it's kind of an extension of that respect, where we are, saying this is worth celebrating. And I want to say to all of you, you are worth celebrating. Your achievements, whatever scale they're at, are worth celebrating, and celebrating helps us move forward, right? We can build on that, take a little time to enjoy it. And, most of us growing up in Latin communities, we know how, right? We know how to have fun, and everything about what we do when we celebrate is something we can build on. So timelines, experiences, and evolution. Timelines. The campaign. In fashion, they will roll out an idea, but they need to build it first. So you need to build all sorts of variations of something that connect to a general idea. And like I said earlier, all companies do this. They need to think about how they're going to package something. So this is Indochino, and I just wanted to roll through some images. These are all related, right, in terms of bright colors, but they're different, different viewpoints, focusing on different models, focusing on different colors. And so if you're doing a campaign like on Instagram, right, you're rolling out a campaign of images about your collection or a project. You want to think this way. You want to have, work with the photographer to come up with variations, because if you're laying out that same image over and over and over, whatever it is, it's going to get tired really fast. So, 1 week or one day it can be this, then it moves to this, and onward. And I wanted to show you that this was a really fun idea, because I believe the idea was built around Pride. But this collection and the way it was put together was influenced directly by Lego, who did this wonderful Lego set for Pride. All right, timelines. I have a little calendar here, and I very intentionally have the arrow going in the other direction. You do not want to build forward. You want to reverse engineer. If it's a project, if it's a career, all these kinds of things, you want to think about what's the target, and then make sure you have the time it takes to build something of quality that will arrive on time, that will be delivered on time. I'm always amazed when someone tries to put an event together in a month, right? Because you might be able to, but it may not be at a level that's kind of worth doing, that's worth spending the money on. So I like to make sure that I'm working far enough in advance. And designers do this all the time, because if they're showing spring in September, chances are that they're also working on the next season. They've already started to think about fall, because they need to show fall in February. So you want to keep in mind that those reverse engineering, those timetables, is a common thing in fashion, and something we can apply to, well, pretty much whatever we want to do. The easiest comparison to sort of everyday life is, think about planning a wedding. How much lead time do you need, right? For each thing, invitations, the venue, all that good stuff. The rollout. So this is about, again, how you want to distribute or roll out this information. One of your tools for this are words. And I can't encourage anyone I speak to enough to think about being able to put words down on paper, being able to organize your words into well-crafted statements that you can read or speak. I just love this quote, and I wanted to get Carolina Herrera in here. And if you don't have anything to say, then you're nowhere. She said this in a great documentary about the New York Tents. It's called The Tents, another great doc to check out. And one of the things I love about this in terms of style is that this is on the left, kind of her signature wardrobe. Although she always dressed in different beautiful clothes, this was the look that I most identify with her. And it just so, it looks so ready for work, but at a glamorous level. And then, of course, this incredible other picture on the side that's more of a very high fashion art shot. Images. So I want to take this moment because we all use a lot of images when we're posting, and I want to give you some tips because it always drives me crazy when people post bad images because there's really no need to with all the things you have out there. Quick little tip. Right now, if you look at me, I don't know if you can see me on the screen, but not only do I have a virtual background, but I have 3 lights. I have a light in front of me. I have one that's lighting my green screen and another one that's lighting me a little bit from behind. And 3-point lighting, if you can achieve it, this is a great thing. So again, think of a main light, a fill light underneath so you don't get shadows under your eyes or your chin, and then one lighting the background so you get a little bit of an edge around your head. Okay, so this is professional lighting. On your cameras, your phones, the rule of thirds. So this, you can put this on your screen, on your phone, you can settings, you can select to have the grid, and it's this grid. Positioning your subject on one of the thirds is a great way to get beautiful composition. And this is a tip for everybody. If you're taking a picture of your granddaughter or of a model on a runway, this helps it be more than just documenting something, shooting something head on. And then basically framing or editing a picture. This is on the left, a beautiful picture, but on the right, we have more intensity because it's cropped a little closer. And there's an intimacy there. So again, playing with editing can also have a lot of power in terms of your imagery. Experiences. You want to be able to define spaces, to bring spaces to life. This is the first sort of line of attack for a lot of designers. This is a very generic, but again, very beautiful space. But you want to ask yourself, how do you want to interpret it? This is one way, but obviously it can be interpreted in so many different ways. But thinking about the space you're in is really important. Thinking about what it's going to feel like to walk into a space. And this could be your office. This could be a party. And it could be something as simple as changing the lighting or having a focal point, the music you have in a space, like a lot of fashion shows. For instance, imagine this fashion show, right, in this space. You're showing up and they're playing nothing but classical music or jazz, something very mellow. And then all of a sudden the lights go down, the music starts, and it's serious rock music. Right? That's going to be jarring. It's going to create a response and help you define that space. That's what you will remember from this space. Designing the experience itself is all about what you do in that space. So this is a still from an exhibition at the Met. Now I want to get your attention for right here. They had all these incredible machines that would give you views of this dress from vantage points that you couldn't possibly have. So it would move up, it would go really close to the fabric. So it would shoot from the front, from the back. So it was like having your own film director shooting this dress. And this was something that was created for that experience. It helped define that experience. This is another one. This is a runway show, but done in a lavender field. I chose this one because I want you to think about the scent, right? Not only do we have this, beautiful models, beautiful clothes, and this beautiful hot pink runway, but imagine, and also being outdoors in the sun, but imagine the smell of the lavender. right? Adding a whole other dimension. Making memories. That's what the red carpet is all about, right? You know, like the red carpet is all about getting photographed, catching a moment, an entrance or an exit. So this is another thing to think about, is what kind of experience do you want to have? So do you want, a lot of events right now, for instance, will put up a step and repeat, you know, where you see all the logos, and ask yourself, how can you take that to another level? How can, you know, and I know people who do parties have those now, right? Because it's just a fun thing to do, to pose for a camera. And then last one on here is evolution. You want to think about new definitions. This is lace, right? Hand done lace. Actually, it's probably machine done, but it's the idea is built on making lace with thread, right? This is, excuse me, laser cut lace, right? So we have all this new technology, but I want you to remember that the origins are always somewhere in fashion history, but we can redefine it using new technology, new perceptions, new ways of thinking about things. And there's always something new. Every couple of years, people are always trying to explore that. And then this is very important. This is a quote I live by. No one cares how good you used to be. And this is really, really key, especially in fashion, because you could have the best collection ever. And next season, nope, don't care, haven't, you know, not exciting anymore. So you always want to remember that the world out there isn't living in your head or in your studio. Another thing that I tell students is, like, when you do a fashion show, right? That's not news. Nobody cares. That's your job, right? To make pretty clothes and show them. So you have to give them a reason to care, a reason to connect with what you're doing. So maybe you do something that's tied around community service, or that you're collaborating with an artist. So it's your job to get people to care about what you do, and you need to do it on a regular basis. In fashion, more regular than anything else, because the cycles of fashion have gotten so intense. Perceptions. So we want to think about, there's a lot of talk about the gaze, right? The male gaze, or the Latinx gaze, or the white gaze. And we want to ask ourselves, as professionals, are we recognizing the end user? Are we thinking about this? This was always a big deal for me, Band-Aids, right? Sort of like this idea of just having different color Band-Aids didn't occur to anyone for ages, right? So thinking about, you know, who's looking, how are we being looked at? And again, let that being part of the creative process. And then of course, representation. We want to be able to see ourselves, whether that means Black, Latinx, full figure, LGBTQIA, whatever it is, it's important for us to think about that. And not just on consumers where we're calling out other people, but we want to make sure that we're including that in our practices, right? Like in what we're doing. Are we seeing the big picture? And then of course, they're the jobs that don't exist yet. A lot of people forget that they're going to be jobs that we never even thought of before.
That is good.
And then sustainability, all of this, we want to think about how we can keep this up. I'm not talking about sustainability in terms of the planet, you know, in terms of good practices. I'm talking about sustainability in terms of your career. Can you keep this up? So everything we've been talking about, especially in fashion, we repeat. So it's lather, rinse, repeat, right? So that's something we get used to in fashion right away. But it's something we need to consider in general for almost any career in today's marketplace. And then this is the last line in my book, which is always be innovating you. Because we can definitely get kind of enamored of technology and the latest, you know, latest trends. But the real person to work on is you. Like, think about how you can be innovating you, because although we don't like to think of ourselves this way, because it's not us, the person, but our professional persona or our professional career is a commodity. We're a person, and we are great just the way we are, but then what we're putting in the world is going to be a commodity of some sort, either services or products. And we want to think about whatever we're putting out there, that we are innovating, that we are thinking in a new way, saying, okay, what can we bring to the table next season? And then finally, celebrate. We talked about this a little bit, but having some fun in and enjoying our culture and incorporating it into our celebrations. And then finally, do the work. Oh, I have a typo there, pardon that. Experiment, share the work, enjoy it, and more important than anything, build a practice. A lot of people don't realize when it comes to fashion that it's just like a lawyer building a practice, a doctor building a practice. You have to build your practice. You build your reputation, but you always are learning new things. And I just love that word, because practice means two things, right? It could be the practice itself, or the idea of practicing and always keeping in touch with those skills. All right. So I hope I didn't go too fast. I was trying to make good time.
Yeah.
But that is what I have to share with you. And I look forward to any questions you might have.
Well, thank you. I'm so many ideas going on in my head, so I'll be quiet. Carlos has the task of curating the questions in the chat, because there were great questions all along the way.
Oh, good.
Carolina Herrera and some other Latina designers and so forth. So Carlos, I'll let you try to curate some of these questions. Oh, before we do, I want to acknowledge my board chairs here, Evelyn Barahona, talk about a fashionista. Thank you for being here. And Denise Hammond, who is the president of the Fashion Institute and worked with Jay for a number of years. So I wanted to thank you so much. And she's also one of our mentors as well. So thank you for joining us, Denise. So go ahead, Carlos.
Thank you, Phyllis. Jay, we have an interesting question here.
Okay.
Speaking of the Kardashian, what is your take on appropriation versus appreciation of fashion from a cultural perspective?
Oh, that's important. That's huge. There are some designers who feel like everything's on the table. And I'm a creative person. I want to do what I want. I think it goes back to really tapping into that idea of respect. If you really like something enough to try to want to incorporate it into your designing, then you should respect it enough to do the homework. So I was fortunate enough to work on an exhibition, or the book for an exhibition around Native fashion at the Peabody Essex Museum. And during a talk, I got to ask the question, as an audience member, of these Native American designers, because Native Americans also, it comes to creativity and inspiration, it's a very fragile ecosystem, right? There's a danger of losing parts of that culture, because we've lost so much already. But I said to him, I said, I'm a fashion design teacher. What do I tell my students, right? And he's had a one word answer to that question. Ask, reach out, communicate with us. If something is sacred or off the table, we will let you know. So for instance, to the best of my knowledge, the Native American headdress, that is something that even among Native Americans, you have to earn the right to wear. So it is an incredible insult to those communities to wear it to Coachella, or to wear it on a Victoria's Secret runway. That's just like, when I see that, it bothers me so much, mainly because I have spoken to Native American designers and they have informed me of why that's important to them. Whereas other things, fringe, beads, not an issue, right? And the other thing about this when it comes to the fashion industry is I've heard of designers I think Carla told me this story, going to Mexico to work with artisans, and they wouldn't do it cheap enough for them. So these brands, and these are big brands, I won't name them, but big brands, who then went to China, copied their designs and got it done cheaper.
Oh.
And so basically stole it and then gave the money to somebody else, right? So you want to think about, and that's why I love when people like Diet Prada, not people, but they like Diet Prada on Instagram, when they call out these designers, because it's lazy and it's cheap. When you think about that way, if you think it's that easy to steal from someone, and also they don't have a lot of recourse, then you're just not a good player, right? You may be making money, but I personally don't have respect for people who do that. So, but I will say that I have definitely been inspired by other cultures, and the key is to do your homework, to connect, to find out where that line is drawn for someone else, because that is just being a good citizen of the planet. So, but I definitely think that there are instances where you can, again, find ways to interpret the things you love about other cultures. Is that good? Yep. Okay.
Good day. And then we have a question by our own Lisette. Says, do you see a role thrift stores and secondhand clothing buying options in person versus online play with how we consume fashion?
Yep. That is probably one of the best starting points for consuming more sustainably, right? With more respect for the planet. And it's part of a new part of the industry, the resale economy. There's also the rent economy, where things like Rent the Runway allow us to just rent clothes for a special occasion. And then that goes back into the system for someone else who might be able to use it. And there's actually a new area of this. Actually, I don't want to lose sight of the secondhand stores or vintage stores. For instance, here in Boston, we have Boomerangs, but we also have Boomerangs second edition, which kind of carries really high-end fashion in South End. And they are vital because you can find, an actual, a designer piece. And again, it's being resold, right? So you're extending the life of these products. So they help kind of negate some of the footprint of making this stuff. But I think there's also, I want to bring up, because this is a good point to bring up, is digital fashion. A lot of people are asking, what is the value of that? And for people whose life, for a big part of their life is that outfit of the day, like on Instagram, digital fashion is providing this new way for you to dress up in something, but it's completely digital, because so many people were buying clothes just to have a new outfit on the next day, not necessarily wearing it again, possibly throwing it away. and this idea of having to have something new every day is kind of a little insane, but now that it's a part of the culture, we can use other tools to do that in a way that doesn't affect the planet in a negative way. Is that good? Yeah, okay.
I'm not sure if anybody has a question they would like to, post to Jay right now. Please feel free to raise your hand and unmute your mic if you want to. Denise, go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, Jay. It's so great to see you again. And I could listen to you all day long. I used to stand outside your classroom and listen to you talk. So thank you so much. You covered such a breadth of not only the fashion industry, but what it means to work in other industries as well. And I think at the very beginning, you talked about evolution and evolving as your own person and bringing the lifelong learning aspect of whatever career field you're in. I think it's so critical to everyone. And you want to continue to keep learning and evolving as a person. And it's so difficult with the society changing so quickly and our cultures expanding all the time. And so I just want to say thank you, because I really think you shed a great light on what it means to be in the workplace professionally, to what it means to be your own person when you're at home, and being true to yourself. You know, whether you're in the fashion industry or whatever field you're in, it's being comfortable with who you are. So thank you so much. It was really insightful.
Thank you, Denise. I appreciate that. And you said something really important that I may have touched on a little bit, but also know that you're in the driver's seat, so to speak, and you can put on the brakes. So that sense of agency is also talking about you going at your own pace. We hear a lot about fast fashion, but you want to think about slow fashion. You want to run your business on your terms. And we talked a little bit about this with scale, but there are companies where you order something and you actually have to wait for it. You don't get it the next day, right? So there are companies where you might have to wait 3 months or 6 months to get this beautiful custom jacket made for you. And we've forgotten how good clothes feel when they're made for you. They fit different. They make us stand differently. But more and more people are seeing the value of investing in clothes that take longer to make but are better made. And so it's important to think from a creative person or a business person's point of view that you can choose to be on your timetable. Everybody, when we're in fashion, we think, oh, okay, we got to show the next collection. It's due. That's when Fashion Week is. But you can choose to have your own calendar. Azzedine Alaya did not follow the fashion calendar. He worked on a collection, and when it was done, when he felt it was done, he showed it, and that was it. So you can follow the system, you can follow the calendar, but you can also choose to do business on your terms. Now, granted, sometimes it's a little harder, sometimes a little more expensive, but you can choose to do it and build it from there. So I think one of the biggest messages I hope everybody takes away is, especially in fashion, people are pitching you the way you should be doing things. And I'm sure it's similar in a lot of industries. That is one way. That is something you can choose to say, oh, I'm going to try that out. And I have done it. You know, I've worked in the industry and, you know, been on that wheel. And you can decide when you want to pull back and when you want to reorient. Like, you know, like they say pivot, but basically reorient within what you want to do.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. Does anyone else have a comment or a question before we wrap up? We have maybe time for one more, Carlos.
There was a question. I know you touched on this during your presentation, but I think it might be a good one to close with. Who are your fashion heroes and why?
I have to bring up Mr. Rogers, and only because, besides him being just my hero in general, that whole idea of dressing for the occasion. So he would come into the set, he'd sit down, change his sweater, change his shoes. That was my first brush with fashion. But also I love Bill Cunningham. He's a fashion street photographer who passed away a couple of years ago. And although it's important to get paid, I don't want to, you know, say that we shouldn't think about that. He once said, at least for the things that are important to you, if you don't take their money, you don't have to do what they tell you to do. And he famously, for Women's Wear Daily, had a stack of checks that he never took or cashed in. And that was because he could refuse anything he did not want to do. And although we're not always in a situation we can do that, I want you to think about always being able to say no to something. Always be in a position where you feel comfortable saying no, even if that means losing it. Again, it's a bit of a luxury sometimes if we're really struggling, but that should be the goal where nothing's more important than you being excellent at what you do and having what you stand for. Like one of the things that he didn't like was do's and don'ts, like where they had pictures of women who weren't wearing fashion well enough for the magazine, and they had those little black bars over their eyes.
Oh,
He was so offended by that. He said that is a horrible thing to do to another human being, but he was working for a fashion publication where that was the trend. And that's, if I'm not mistaken, that could be one of the things that made him quit. But they were saying, no, that's what we want you to do. And he said no. So you want to ask yourself, you know, how comfortable are you going to be saying no to something if it doesn't live up to what your goals are and what your standards are?
well, thank you. That's a good place to, I guess, wrap up. I agree with Denise. I could listen to you for hours. I think there are a lot of good life lessons here as well. So I want to thank you so much. It was certainly a deeper dive into fashion at another level we don't ordinarily get, many of us don't get exposed to. So I want to thank you for that, your insights. As I think we said at the beginning, a lot of really good food for thought. And I want to thank you again for your insightful comments. I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening, and please share with your friends and colleagues. Hopefully we did record so they can maybe look at it later for those who weren't able to join us. But again, thank you so much, Jay.
My pleasure.
For your contributions, and thank all of you, and have a wonderful rest of your week.